Thank you very much. So just 5 minutes from me to warm up the discussion. So you heard this morning from a number of leaders who were very clear about what the scale of the problem was and what was causing it. So what I'm going to do in the next 5 minutes is just give us some data points, because it's always good to see it in comparison and to actually see how things are changing over time. So for those of you who've been at the Reykjavik Global Forum before, you know about this data. You know we've been running it since the very first forum meeting in 2018, and that we have been measuring over time how society views men and women in terms of their suitability for leadership. For those of you who haven't been here before, I don't think many people in the room are expecting a cliffhanger. I've been saying we're not coming bringing good news, and don't, it's always awful being the messenger of this. So the Reykjavik Index for Leadership, this forum exists to help women attain and retain power. And when we first started talking about the forum in 2018, what we understood was whilst there are fantastic sources of data that help us understand the outcomes for women in all kinds of areas, what we didn't have was a measure of how men and women were perceived in terms of how societies saw them at the whole society level in terms of their suitability for leadership. So we built a measure to do that. So originally across the G7, and I will share G7 time series, but since 2018, we have been able to do this work across more than 30 countries, and we thank Gates as well today, because I will be sharing data from Kenya and Nigeria with their support. So very simply, what the index does is it asks a random group of people from the different countries where we're working to answer the question, do you feel for a particular leadership role in one of 20-something sectors, do you feel that men or women are more suitable to lead in this sector, or does it not matter? And what the index does is it measures the number of people who say it doesn't matter. So what we're looking for is neutrality, of there not being a link between gender and the right to lead. A score of 100 would indicate a society where people did not associate leadership in any way with gender. We haven't yet had that score. When we first did it in the first year, we got a score of 72. So the way of thinking about that is if men and women are driving along in a car race, they're doing equally well until the 73rd kilometre, when the women hit an obstacle that they can't go beyond. So let's have a look at how things have been going since then. So this is for the G7 data, and I have some slightly better news from elsewhere before I sit down. So there has been no change in the G7 index this year, and that's because two countries, and it's Italy and Japan, have actually improved. And what that does is neutralize what is otherwise a very significant decline in two other countries. And that's the US, who have moved from being towards the top of the G7, towards the bottom, and the UK, which is starting to drop quickly. In all of the other countries, 5 of them, all 5 outside of Italy and Japan, have seen a significant deterioration over time. It's just for a country like France or Canada, it's less rapid than what we've seen in the US and are now seeing in the UK. Germany was towards the bottom when we started measuring, and it's dropped even further. So when we were first here in 2019 and 2020, we thought things were starting to look quite good. By 2021, it was starting to look like it's stalling, but we have been in a phase of decline since then. So this is just to give you a sense of how things are moving between different countries. And as you can see, Canada and France are declining, but at a relatively slow rate. If you look below at the UK, and if you look below at the US, you see something very different. And in the UK, we hit the top score we'd ever had for the G7 at 82 just 4 years ago, and now it's down at 70. Now, Iceland, we've only been measuring for 4 years, and Iceland continues to deliver scores that are way higher than any other country we've ever measured. But as we heard about this morning, Iceland too is catching the wind from some of these other global forces that are hitting us when it comes to equality. Now, remember that the index measures prejudice against men as well as prejudice against women. And we are releasing some data during this conference for you to see that for the pack of data, but what you can know is that men are experiencing increasing prejudice in the caring professions, and that's a very important point from a public policy point of view and from the point of view of men and their ability to continue to thrive in roles. Right, some good news. Thanks to Gates, we've been measuring Kenya and Nigeria for the last couple of years. Their scores are increasing, and actually in Nigeria, the percentage acceptability of women as business leaders is one of the highest we've seen anywhere else. And women are doing extremely well as well in terms of financial services and the association between women leaders and money, which is a pretty great thing to see. So one last slide from me, and this is the big one, because this is about a phenomenon, a social trends phenomenon, that we really do need to understand how unusual it is. This is a once in 80-year phenomenon. So if you think about when social research and social history from the post-World War era started to get tracked in these countries, until a few years ago, young people always came through as more progressive than their parents. So 3 years ago, when I first presented the data here that showed that the scores for young people in terms of their attitudes towards gender equality were declining, I think we all weren't quite sure whether or not we believed the data. So what we can now see is this is entrenched, and if you look at the UK, and if you look at the gap between, so the teal-coloured dots are women of my age, women and men of my age. If you look at the difference between our scores and the scores of people aged 18 to 34, it's an extraordinary thing, and it's happening very fast, and we've never seen it. And from a policy intervention point of view, we've never needed to do something like this before. So it is a very important moment in history for us. So to review, women leaders in most G7 countries are experiencing increasing cultural pushback. That means they will be finding their daily lives as leaders harder. They will be experiencing more challenge to their leadership than they will have done in previous years from when we first started measuring this. It's not the same everywhere. There are places that I think into the future we will increasingly look to for inspiration. East Asia, African continent. There is a strong cognitive resilience within older populations, though, in those countries where the second wave of feminism really did change society. And the difference between older and younger adults is a post-World War phenomenon. It is a phenomenon. That's how we need to view it, and we need to move very quickly because this trend is unlike anything we've seen before. So on that happy note, I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you so much, Michelle Harrison. Usually we have a call to action at the end of the presentation, but I think you've given us a very, very clear one. So with that, I'd like to start the conversation. Sorry, is the mic not working? Can everyone hear me if I shout? Even then?
I think it might not be close enough.
Better? Better? Better. All right. We're still good?
No, it's weird. A bit closer to you. We're going to do intervention at scale, or maybe not at scale. How does that work?
Better? No.
That work?
I'm just going to hold it here if that's okay with everybody. I would like to start first with Þórdís Gylfadóttir. We've seen, again, a very sobering trend, and it's interesting, particularly coming out of 2024, which was supposed to be the biggest year for democracy in the world. Over 50% of the world went to the polls, record numbers of women turning out, and yet the declining numbers of women in leadership, and as Michelle just showed us, increasingly disturbing perceptions of women in leadership. How do we really look at this from a political leader's perspective, and how are we preparing this next generation to step into this breach?
Well, first of all, when I look at these slides, unfortunately, nothing there comes as a surprise. You just feel it, you see it, and even when you look at, for example, Germany, you see it. When you look at the difference in the UK between the younger generation and the older generation, you feel it, you see it, you read it. And, you know, it's, my gut feeling is that my gut feeling will be even more clearer next year, unfortunately. I'm not saying this to ask everyone to be hopeless, you know, I'm just not that optimistic. And there's a difference, because while you're still hopeful, you fight and you use your passion and energy and your words to try to change things. But I would be lying if I said I was optimistic. What do we do? I mean, forums like these are important. Everyday deeds and words and, you know, speaking up and doing the fight for every regular human beings in societies are extremely important. And I sometimes feel that people require a lot from leaders or specific bodies, but it's the everyday work that we need to be doing. And whether we like it or not, the spillover effect from the US is obvious, and it's so powerful, unfortunately. Yeah. It would be different if we were talking about a small European country with development domestically, as we see in the US, but that's not how it is. And it frightens me to see the younger generation feeling this way. I mean,
I think we can only hope we've bottomed out. I mean, we had cautious good news.
I don't think we have. Sorry.
We had cautious good news out of the U.S. with the Virginia governor's race, and it's only one race, but either way, a woman would have been governor of Virginia. So we do need to kind of take that seriously. But this is also an equally disturbing phenomenon in the private sector as well. I mean, you know, we've gone from celebrating the breakers of glass ceilings to New York Times headlines asking, "Did women ruin the workplace?" True story. Look it up. They've since changed it, though. But we've also seen that there's some cautious good news. The number of Fortune 500 CEOs that are women has hit an all-time high this year. It's still only 10.5%. But we also know that women leaders translate into significant economic gains. Harvard Business Review just told us that going from 0 C-suite representation to 30% not only raises 1% net margin, but 15% profitability. I mean, the numbers are there. How are you finding, through your research at Oliver Wyman, that perceptions within the private sector are being influenced by these public perceptions?
Great question. Thank you.
It's not on.
I
think, no.
All right, we'll go by the handhelds. It's a great question. I mean, look, the research on bottom line impact as well as better shareholder outcomes has been around for a while, and we know that, you know, while kind of making the invisible visible with data is important, it's not enough. It doesn't actually by itself result in clear progress. We did see some progress with women's share of new hires to top management, right? So kind of VP plus C-suite roles. And it went from about 32% in 2019 to almost, I think, a little bit over 35 in 2022. But then it fell back. So we actually regressed over the last 3 years. And so I think the pace of progress is always, you know, maybe 2 steps back, 1 step forward, hopefully not 2 steps back at the same time. And we do need to keep pushing. I think there are lots of things that do give me hope in terms of light at the end of the tunnel, as negative as the data that Michelle is seeing. And, you know, I've been studying how humans are changing both as consumers and employees since COVID hit. So we have about 300,000 voices now across generations, across 18 countries globally. And some of the things that we're seeing are interesting. So if you look at people as employees, half of employees feel like the current leadership models are outdated. When you look at what they want more decentralization, they want more representation of people who you know, look and think like them in leadership roles. And I think a lot of that is a generational shift that Gen Z is bringing in as well. So even though, yes, you know, the men of Gen Z are less progressive than their fathers and the women are more progressive, what they're asking for at work is actually similar. And they want to see that change at work. They want to see leaders who are, you know, emotionally intelligent, who can kind of act as connectors, who are authentic. And 13% of Gen Z actually report that they've either quit or are planning to quit because they are not seeing enough gender balance among their colleagues and their leaders. And so even as we're seeing the data that comes out of the Reykjavik, you know, Global Index, I do have some hope, at least in the workplace and private sector, that sort of change will continue. But we need to fill the pipelines. And, I've talked to many of you here around the worry of women stepping out. I'm very encouraged to talk to the, Gen Z from Running Start that are here. They're brilliant women. I hope you've met them. And I think many of us here can act as sponsors, and we need more of that because that truly does make a difference. And I think we need to, make sure we're continuing to fill those short lists for senior roles, and that women taking on these roles have the right expertise, experience, and support to get there.
Oh, thank you for that. And it's good that we can find some ways to be encouraged, especially with, I think, some of the lessons coming out of the private sector. I mean, I'm personally lucky. The industry I represent is a $200 billion industry driven by over 70% women, which is remarkable. They're learning confidence, they're building skills, and skills building and inclusion are two other things that Gen Z is citing in terms of what they want out of that workplace. And I think we need to kind of look at how we are really kind of building that inclusive culture. And Jake, I think this is one we'd love to kind of learn about more from you, our sister mister on the stage. We really can't address what's happening with perceptions of women without talking about all genders and talking about masculinity. And for so long, what makes a good leader has sometimes been traditionally associated with what makes a traditionally masculine person. It's led to some discussions about masculinity being exclusionary, being zero-sum. But you want to change that. And I think changing that definition and making it inclusive masculinity, modern masculinity, hopefully can start to turn the tide with some of the data that we're seeing. Can you tell us more about how you want to change this and how this can really start to lift up those perceptions?
Yeah. Well, the old stories used to be that, boys would grow up to be pilots, and Mike as well, too. Oh, boy. The old stories used to be that, boys would grow up to be pilots and girls would grow up to be stewardesses, and boys would grow up to be presidents and girls would grow up to be teachers in ways. And we've seen a lot of those stories really shattered and a lot of narrative shift. But we haven't seen that necessarily change for boys as well, too. They're seeing themselves not being able to openly aspire to those types of roles and positions. So what we really need is a transformation of the care economy, so getting boys and young men to see themselves not only as providers, but as caregivers and the role they have at home as well, too. When men take on those equal caregiving roles at home, it creates space for women to lean in to work in the workplace or work on themselves. And to do this, we need to expand what it means to be strong for boys as well, too. We also need to break down some of the sector barriers. You didn't show that slide, but I found that really interesting. And how do we really get out of those narratives of what is women's work and what is men's work? And with that, when we free men and boys from rigid stereotypes of masculinity and scarcity mindsets about what's possible for them, we also open doors for women in many ways. And then lastly, I think we really need to look at the young men challenge. It wasn't disaggregated by gender, but I'm sure that young men are really pulling that generational gap down. And that's a huge warning sign. Young men and women's digital experiences are not overlapping or connected at all. And so how do we kind of create those gaps? And, there was conversations about love and relationships and connection. If you just don't have shared lived experiences, how can you foster that as well, too? So I think that's a really important thing for us. And to do that, we need to reach them through where their peers are, right? Where they're gaming, where they're playing sports, and the men in their lives. And kind of just to take that story through to its conclusion, I think that we've done a great job of changing narratives of how we raise our daughters to be more like our sons, but it'll never work until we raise our sons to be more like our daughters as well, too.
Oh, for sure. And it reminds me, I think, of something I heard when I was on the campaign trail with Vice President Harris last year, when men on the other side were telling us, stop demonizing us and start listening to us. And I think the more we can all do to listen, I think it's going to be great. I know we've got about 30 seconds left. I want to do a quick lightning round because social media has come up over and over again. We heard it this morning as kind of one of the reasons when we unpack why this is happening. So maybe just sort of going around to each of you for last word, what's one thing that we should be doing on social media to harness it and change the narrative for the better? And maybe come back next year, Michelle, with better results. So Anna, can I start with you?
Sure. I think even before we get to social media, I think we need more people in technology. I think we need more content creators, and I think we need more influencers in these rooms. Because I think if we don't have them in these rooms, we're not going to eventually have them on social media. And I think we have to look more broadly at what's causing the dissatisfaction. So fulfillment has dropped, has had the biggest drop in terms of how people feel in the last 5 years. They're significantly less fulfilled. It's a top 3 issue for attrition and dissatisfaction. And I think until we can understand a little bit some of those causes, we're going to be seeing that spill over on social media.
Great. Þórdís, what's one thing we can do?
One thing we can do? Well, I would say that we should acknowledge the fact that freedom of expression is a fundamental human right. And human rights are actually for human beings. Human rights are not for bots. And we should be able to agree that we need rules in this world. I think we will very soon, and many people have already looked at the bad parts of social media as, smoking for kids. It's just not, and our enemies, the enemies of our fundamental values, the enemies of fundamental human rights, democracy and freedom, they know that and they play with it, which means that we now live in a world where there doesn't seem to be shared truth. There's no shared reality. And to be able to vaccinate ourselves from that, we have to know about it, that we are being played. And we just allow, not only children, but also, us grown-ups do it too. So if we could do one thing, that is, if we can all agree that fundamental human rights are actually for human beings, there is a lot that we can do. And then we need more, because lies spread way faster than truth on social media, but hopeful content spread as fast as lies. So we need more of that, because when people know that, for example, gender equality is good for business, it's good for peace, and people worry about these things, but still it doesn't seem to come in. And I think that's also because we are literally being attacked. Exactly. It's not only, war of aggression physically, it's also war and informational war and political war. So
great. Jade, how do we change the narrative?
I think, for so much of this conference, earlier we discussed the what's in it for me aspect of it as well, and we know how boys and men benefit from patriarchy, but the same system that benefits them is the same that deeply harms them.
Right.
And so how do we invite them into that narrative of, suicide, isolation, incarceration, etc., and that brings them in as partners, not obstacles.
Definitely. Michelle, last word.
I think we need to fundamentally think about how we can spend a lot more time on youth policy in all of its guises, because the forces that are coming at us are going to do them further harm. And we really need to spend a lot more time thinking about young people everywhere.
No, I couldn't agree more. I know you all can't hear me, and I'll try to yell as much as I can, but the fact is that, no, you're absolutely right.
This is really coming not just from hatred of women, it's an excuse. The fact is that youth unemployment is more than 3 times regular unemployment rates in most countries. There is economic dissatisfaction, loss of identity, just overexposure without rules that's at play here. And we all have the power to change that. So let's hope that next year we're giving Michelle better news for 2026, and we'll see you all then. Thank you so much to everybody today. Sorry this was so quick. And thanks to our lovely audience for all their patience with the tech issues.